Introduction. These letters, written at the end of 2003 and the beginning of 2004, are based upon experiences and materials collected beginning in June 2002, when I first went to work with a USAID contracting company located in Ramallah and East Jerusalem. I had two main intentions. First, to write about topics missed by the mainline U.S. press, and second, to open outside eyes to some of the varied political views in Israel regarding Israeli settlements, peace, and relations with Palestinians. At the time they were first individually posted to a list of email subscribers, they were signed Lamont Cranston. I used the pseudonym to avoid problems for my employer, to forestall undesired exchanges with readers, and to pay a small tribute to a deceased friend, Tom Carr, who had likewise used the guise 40 years ago. The hope of suggesting the spectrum of views inside Israel is especially crucial. All too often opinion is muffled in the U.S. because of concerns, either self-imposed or due to aspersions openly cast, that a speaker harbors anti-Semitic ideas. There is irony in this, for anyone inside Israel will hear the same statements, probably expressed more vehemently, from Israelis. As letter number 1 reveals, Israelis aren't immune from attempting to suppress ideas, but the range of opinion and willingness to express them outstrips what the American public gets exposed to. As might be imagined, some letters possess a passing topicality. After events unfold, their relevancy can diminish. On the other hand, they may serve as a useful snapshot of moments otherwise lost in the clarity of what comes to pass. For instance, letter number 11 begins by referring to an obscure Associated Press item about U.S. soldiers investigated for abusing Iraqi prisoners. 8 weeks after this was written, the full story exploded in worldwide headlines. For months, the Department of Defense had been praying no one would uncover the shocking photographs of American soldiers sexually abusing prisoners at Abu Ghraib prison south of Baghdad. The brief reference in the letters serves to introduce an account of an Israeli atrocity committed in 1949 and concealed for many decades. Otherwise, I attributed no significance to the recent episode. Sometimes a dot on the horizon turns out to be an approaching juggernaut. Within these pages, we have the opportunity of reading John Quigley's presentation before a United Nations body concerning Israel's erection of the barrier in occupied Palestinian territory. The precision of Professor Quigley's reasoning and argumentation underscores the importance of legality within the dangerous conditions of the Israeli-Palestinian confrontation. It's naive, however, to think international legal principles alone are capable of resolving the long-standing conflict. I feel accordingly obliged to say a few words about the political impasse existing during my time in West Bank, Gaza. In the face of suicide bombings, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon promised to bring security to Israelis. By any objective measure, his campaign against Arafat, against Hamas, against Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, against Islamic Jihad, against rock-throwing youths, against homemade rockets in Gaza, against whatever forms of violence Palestinians employ, is a failure. Sharon's unrelenting program has been violence and more violence. Seemingly exhausted of ideas and hamstrung by the power inherent in Sharon's elective office, the opposition is virtually paralyzed. Articulating a dissenting opinion today in Israel, particularly one not promising more killing and destruction, requires courage and ingenuity. The dynamic set in motion with the creation of the West Bank settlements raises a terrible conundrum. Insertion of Israeli settlers into Palestinian land instrumentalizes civilians. When they are attacked, as is bound to occur, Israel capitalizes on the available high moral ground. A stagnation of rhetoric and death is the result. In the fall of 2003, new wall posters appeared in Ramallah calling the populace to mourn the death from cancer of the great Palestinian intellectual and defender Edward Said. In contrast to other Palestinians, Said advocated a binational solution. That is, a single state containing two peoples, Israeli and Palestinian. The concept has been attacked as apartheid-like and unworkable for the same reasons that today former Yugoslavia is a cluster of discrete political states. But of course, no one can confidently predict what institutions might develop under a binational policy, whether in the long run the two peoples would grow closer or farther apart. What Said believed was that a binational state would be preferable to a Palestine with its national identity assaulted continuously by the existence of Israeli settlements inside its natural boundaries. One of the most severe political epithets in Israel today is post-Zionist. Close to traitor, it condemns someone who has lost the visionary zeal of the founders, someone who no longer cherishes maintaining a Jewish state. Though Daniel Gavron, a veteran journalist and early Zionist immigrant from Britain, rejects the term, his book, The Other Side of Despair, Jews and Arabs in the Promised Land, published in November 2003, calls for the dissolution of the Israeli state. Gavron declares, quote, "Many Israelis and other Jews will argue that historic justice demands a Jewish state. They will insist, particularly after centuries of horrendous Jewish suffering culminating in the Holocaust, there should be one place on earth where the Jews can exercise their natural right to sovereignty." They are absolutely right. But unfortunately, given the choice between sovereignty and land, we chose land. We have manifestly preferred settlement in the whole land of Israel to a state of Israel in part of the land. It is irrelevant that the settlers are a small minority. The rest of us have permitted them to do what they wanted. I'm saying the settlers have won. That is profoundly sad, but they have. Close quote. The inevitable consequence is that a single state will emerge even if a two-state solution is attempted in the interim. Gavron again. My nightmare is that the scenario of the one-state solution is going to happen the wrong way. We will fence off the Palestinians, continue to clash with them, they will continue to mount terrorist attacks against us, and we will continue retaliating. De facto, it will become one state without it being properly defined or envisaged. At a certain time, it will come under the control of the Arab majority. Gavron urges the creation of a new multicultural state to be named Jerusalem, signifying the reverence of Muslims and Jews in common attached to the holy city. While Jews still command a majority of the new state, they must use the time to create an enviable constitutional regime, one of prosperity and guaranteed rights, where Jews and Palestinians will want to live. Gavron foresees a government enabling maximum ethnic, religious, cultural, and educational autonomy for the communities that will comprise the state of Jerusalem. Yerushalim in Hebrew, Ursalim al-Quds in Arabic. Quote, apart from the Muslim Arabs and the secular Jews, this autonomy can be granted to communities such as the ultra-Orthodox Jews with their special requirements. It will also solve the problems of the various Christian communities in the country. These include the Arab Christians, the significant number of Christians who have arrived from the former Soviet Union in the past decade, and the large community of foreign workers who have come in the same period. Is Gavron hopelessly utopian? Dennis Ross, former U.S. envoy concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, insists that he believes in solutions based on reality, not myths. But what is practical about two states living side by side in peace, one on land taken by force from the other? Letter number 1. Religious Freedom. In the waning years of the last century, I taught comparative constitutional law to a class of Cambodian students. Because Cambodia had experienced no less than 5 constitutions in the previous 10 years, the task possessed its challenges, but none more daunting than dealing with the issue of religious freedom. In a section listing constitutionally protected rights, a clause stated unambiguously that in the royal kingdom of Cambodia, everyone shall possess the right to free practice of religion. And yet, an opening article set forth an equally forthright declaration that in Cambodia, Buddhism is the official state religion. Evidently, the authors of the founding document of the Khmer nation did not detect any contradiction in these two clauses, or if they did, the conflict did not stay their hand. I spoke to a colleague, someone resident in Phnom Penh longer than I, about my difficulties in reconciling the two provisions. He responded that since Buddhism was such a benign teaching, its official status wouldn't prove nefarious. Thinking to myself how Buddhism had failed to protect the lives of 1 million victims of the Khmer Rouge, I uttered something flippant and turned the conversation onto a different course. Little did I know in 1997 that 5 years later, again employed in a distant locale, I would daily behold the contradictions of a religious state so profound as to make Cambodia's appear but a tick on the skin of the body politic. That is, the State of Israel. Unlike Cambodia, where explicit harnessing of state and religion, at least at that moment, did not threaten the social fabric, in Israel it points a dagger at the soul of a nation. Promoting itself as a Jewish state, Israel puts itself up for grabs before a multitude of competing theocrats, sects, tendencies, rabbinical firebrands, and crackpots, each convinced his path is righteous and faithful to authentic Judaism. If Israel is a constitutional laboratory for state and religion, it is one in which the experiments have gone terribly haywire. This is also a side of Israel unknown to most outsiders. A small example. In 1968, a French couple from Alsace, Lucien and Janine Lazare, moved to Jerusalem. They found a home in the neighborhood of Talbia and commenced worship at the Ohel Nehemiah Synagogue on Chopin Street. The synagogue became a second home. They liked the mix of languages and customs they found among those with whom they socialized at the synagogue, considering it unique to Jerusalem's Judaism. They spoke of everything that is, except politics. Aware that differences on fundamental questions about the state, the settlements, and Israel's future were deep and antagonistic, an unspoken consensus evolved to leave them alone. The Lazares refrained from speaking to other congregants about their efforts to promote understanding between Israelis and Arabs, and thus they lived for 35 years, until the day Lucien found an envelope in his letterbox signed by nearly 50 of his fellow worshippers at the synagogue. The signers were outraged that Lucien had translated an article written by his son-in-law, Avraham Berg, a member of the Knesset, for publication in Le Monde. The title of the article was "Zionism is Dead." The writers of the letter were particularly incensed that Berg had spoken as an observant Jew and that he had exposed Israel's troubles to the French, whom they believe wish harm to Israel. "We felt betrayed by your actions," the letter writers began, "in translating this rubbishy outburst, that is, and in precipitously sending it to the Western press. Lucien Lazare, you have been an accomplice in strengthening our enemy's fight. You tightened the last screw in the explosive belt that tomorrow will kill members of our people. And we call upon you to repent on Yom Kippur, which is almost here. We will not shake your hand." From that moment, the Lazares felt themselves banished from their synagogue. Today, Lucien has found a yeshiva, quote, "where I don't know a soul, and no one knew me." His wife has a sense of paralysis and worries, "What kind of a world am I leaving for my 18 grandchildren?" If the Lazares are a snapshot of one family's torment, the 8th anniversary of the killing of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by a fundamentalist zealot reveals the miasma of the nation as a whole. A memorial service drew more than 100,000 people to Tel Aviv's Rabin Square on the Saturday evening of November 1st. It may have been the largest mass ever assembled by the left in Israel's history. Political signs were prominent: "Leave the territories, save the country," etc. Yet the crowd's mood was somber. No belligerency, no angry shouts. Instead, the throng listened politely to the speeches and songs, and the applause was restrained. Rabin's murder remains vividly etched in the minds of those present, the more so by what has followed, including vandalism in that same square the night before. Because Israeli newspapers do not print, and many eschew watching television and radio listening on the Sabbath, the report buzzed by word of mouth. Kahani was right, had been spray-painted along with silver swastikas on Rabin's shrine. Using the Hakenkreuz to deface an Israeli monument strikes an outsider as so phenomenally daft as to defy understanding. But a few days later, the sports page in the newspaper Haaretz offered a tip. Two basketball rivals, Hapoel Tel Aviv and Maccabi Rishon LeZion, were being summoned before a disciplinary hearing. Despite the efforts of the manager and coach to stop them, reported Haaretz, Hapoel's fans were heard repeatedly chanting, "All Maccabi fans will die today. Maccabi are Nazis. Let there be a Holocaust for Nazis." Third Reich epithet and symbolism becoming Israeli vernacular? This cannot be what David Ben-Gurion had in mind.